Hopes are high as Japan's Nakajima Kikka lines up for takeoff. In August 1945, with Allied forces closing in and resources dwindling, this represents Japan's first turbojet-powered aircraft, fitted with twin NE-20 engines, and for this critical flight, additional rocket boosters to help launch it skyward. But as the Kikka begins its roll down the runway, it becomes clear that something is wrong. The rockets ignite, roaring to life, propelling the Kikka forward as the nose tips up, straining for lift. But the aircraft hesitates, teetering on the brink. Inside the cockpit, the pilot struggles to coax the jet into the air. The rockets burn out, and the nose smacks back down, bouncing off the hard ground. The Kikka's speed is still too low. The end of the runway looms, with nothing but ocean beyond it. Japan's hopes for a future in jet-powered warfare, its last desperate grasp at staying in the fight, are riding on this flight. The Kikka plunges forward, now past the point of no return, its pilot wrestling to stop the jet from skidding into the sea. Failure doesn't just mean the end of the Kikka, it means surrendering control of Japan's skies to the advancing Allied forces. Japan takes a gamble. Back in 1941, Japan was making colossal strides in its relentless campaign across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. With an armada of soaring war machines, Japan rained down destruction upon its foes, each assault further tightening its grip on the region. On December 7th, Japan's strike force, undetected and primed for battle, opted to take their invasion one step further upon launching a furious assault on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. Like hawks descending upon prey, 360 Japanese aircraft surged through the skies, their targets locked, engines roaring as they closed in. They unleashed a storm of dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters in a lethal two-wave assault that crashed down on the unsuspecting Americans. The once peaceful island of Honolulu was suddenly engulfed in explosions, flames, and chaos. The destruction was staggering. All 8 battleships in the harbor were hit, many left smoldering in ruin. Nearly 180 aircraft obliterated, their twisting remains scattered across airfields, with fires raging throughout the base. More than 2,300 lives were lost in a matter of minutes. The sheer scale of devastation sent shockwaves through the U.S. military and nation alike, igniting a fury that would drive America to declare war on Japan the very next day. Yet, unknown to the Japanese, a fatal oversight in their mission would cost them the upper hand. The American Pacific Fleet's 3 aircraft carriers were at sea, untouched by the carnage at Pearl Harbor. These vessels became the backbone of America's naval defense, launching counterattacks to rain down their vengeance on Japanese forces. With the element of surprise lost, Japan knew its expansion would not go unchallenged anymore, and its warplanes would need to evolve if they ever hoped to face the powerful enemy they had just made. Suddenly, ensuring air superiority wasn't just about dominion. It was a matter of survival. Looking for a hero. 6 months after the Pearl Harbor raid, the tide of the Pacific War shifted dramatically. At the Battle of Midway, American forces dealt a crushing blow to Japan's fleet, leading to devastating losses in both men and equipment. Japan's once dominant hold over the Pacific now faced a serious threat. The one hope for Japanese forces came in the form of a technological marvel from their allies. Germany had recently unveiled the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. As the plane soared through its initial test flights in Germany, Japanese diplomats and military attachés watched in awe, captivated by the Me-262's unmatched raw power, a true revolution in aerial warfare that tore through the skies at breathtaking velocities. This could be the weapon Japan needed to regain control over the Pacific and tip the scales back in their favor. The Japanese attachés immediately reported home, detailing everything about the German aircraft. Japan's Imperial Navy quickly determined that they too needed a fighter to dominate the skies, a jet-powered aircraft that could keep pace with or even outmatch the Me-262. The Nakajima Aircraft Company was assigned the mission of developing a fast, jet-powered attack plane inspired by this German marvel. But the war had strained Japan's resources to the limit, making vital materials scarce. Limitations aside, developing traditional liquid-cooled engines presented immense challenges to the nation's engineers. Now, jumping into the uncharted territory of turbojet technology while under constant threat of invasion seemed like a near impossible feat. Nevertheless, Japan was determined to persevere, set on building a jet that could stop the relentless advance of American forces before it was too late. Journey across the world. In 1943, Japan dispatched a team of engineers to Nazi-occupied France, their mission as urgent as it was dangerous, to unlock the secrets of Germany's cutting-edge jet technology and bring it back to Japan's war effort. But negotiations were tense. Germany, reluctant to share its top-secret aircraft designs, doubted how much information to share with its allies. However, as the Axis began to falter under relentless Allied pressure, Germany had no option but to concede. Japan was granted access to blueprints for the Messerschmitt Me-262 fighter jet and the rocket-powered Me-163 interceptor, as well as the designs and components for BMW WW2 and Junkers Umo 004 engines. However, this victory for the Japanese was quickly eclipsed by a new challenge: how to smuggle this trove of military secrets and advanced machinery across war-torn territory and safely back to Japan. Land routes through Europe were fraught with Allied checkpoints, and transport by plane was impossible with the volume of cargo. Only one option remained: submarine transport. Japanese submarine I-29, also known as the Matsu, was commissioned for the covert mission. It navigated its way from France through treacherous waters and embarked on a months-long voyage back to Japan. The I-29 stealthily skirted Africa and reached the relative safety of Japanese-occupied Singapore. There, a Japanese officer carrying critical information decided to disembark, leaving with only his personal notes and photos. But I-29 wouldn't be safe for long. As the vessel resumed her journey home, Allied forces, intercepting its signal through intelligence, tracked it down. A submarine under Commander W.D. Wilkins's task force near the Philippines detected the sub. Torpedoes launched. 3 struck right on target, and in moments, I-29 sank to the bottom of the ocean, taking with it most of Japan's hopes for rapid jet development. But Japan's jet program wasn't over just yet. The officer who left in Singapore had managed to return to Japan, clutching his rough sketches, photos, and notes. While incomplete and focused on the BMW WW2 rather than the Me-262's Umo 004 engine, these fragments became Japan's last desperate hope for developing their own jet power. The information was far from ideal, but in a country increasingly on the defensive, it was enough to fuel their fading ambition. A race for survival. Designers Kenichi Matsumura and Kazuo Ono were given a task that could shift the course of the war, crafting Japan's own version of the feared German Me-262 jet fighter in record time. The new machine was named the Nakajima Kikka, Japanese for orange blossom. The design the engineers envisioned was a leaner, all-metal counterpart to the German powerhouse. Still, Japan's journey to jet propulsion had several issues getting off the ground. At first, the Kikka was to use the Su-11, a primitive jet engine that barely generated a fraction of the thrust of the Me-262's engine. This quickly proved inadequate. Japanese engineers, determined to close the gap, set their sights on developing the Ne-20 turbojet, a design heavily based on the German BMW WW2 engine, with the limited information they had managed to get back from France. Unlike the German engine, the Ne-20 lacked the full power Japan desperately needed, but there was no time for perfection. Japan was already stretched thin, with critical resources dwindling and Allied bombers relentlessly pounding factories, railways, and towns. Every strike cut deeper into Japan's ability to manufacture essential war materials, leaving engineers with dwindling supplies of metal, fuel, and skilled labor. Adding to these challenges, in December 1944, an 8.1 magnitude earthquake shook Honshu's southern coast, triggering a devastating tsunami that crashed into the Kumano coast with waves towering over 33 feet. Factories and towns lay in ruins. The Earth itself seemed to be against Japan's war defense. However, by June 1945, Nakajima had managed to assemble their first Kikka prototype. The question that remained was whether or not it would be able to take its first flight before Japan was forced to surrender. The Japanese Me-262. When the Japanese first witnessed the Me-262 take to the skies, they had set their sights on recreating a similar jet aircraft. When the final version of the Nakajima Kikka finally emerged, the German inspiration was evident, retaining a similar yet streamlined silhouette. Minimization became the guiding principle of the Kikka's design when compared to its German counterpart. The Japanese jet was smaller and lighter than the Me-262, measuring 26 feet in length, with a wingspan of 32 feet and a height of 10 feet. This compact design was justified, given that the Kikka's NE-20 engines required less space than the Me-262's larger Yumo 004 engines. But despite the Japanese engineers' dedication, the Kikka's performance fell short of the German jet's size. The Kikka's range was estimated at 127 miles with a 1,100-pound bomb, or 173 miles with a 550-pound bomb, a stark contrast to the Me-262's 525-mile range with its full military load and additional fuel tanks. In terms of speed, the Kikka maxed out at 432 miles per hour, while the Me-262 could reach up to 540 miles per hour. As for armament, the Kikka was limited to a single bomb, while the Me-262 was armed with 4 30mm Mark 108 cannons, up to 24 55mm R4M rockets, and 2 bombs, marking a clear difference in combat potential. One area where the Kikka did possess a distinct advantage was in its takeoff distance, requiring only 1,150 feet with rocket assistance, compared to the Me-262's need for at least 3,297 feet. This shorter takeoff run made the Kikka slightly more adaptable to Japan's challenging conditions at the war's end, a recurring theme that was taken into account while developing the Kikka. A plane built to never land. Under relentless Allied pressure, Japan was forced to build aircraft that could survive the unforgiving realities of a war-ravaged homeland, leading to the implementation of unconventional capabilities for Kikka, including foldable wings that could allow the plane to be kept hidden in caves and tight spaces, poised for sudden offensive strikes and last-line defenses. Material shortages by this late stage in the war meant Japanese engineers had to use lower-grade metals for the turbine blades of the Kikka's NE-20 engines. Each flight would wear down the weak blades to the point that they would need replacing after every sortie. Continuous modifications and repairs would have been taxing, but desperation had set in, and Japan's leaders concluded that the Kikka would likely serve as a kamikaze aircraft, reducing their first ever turbojet to a single-use disposable weapon. On August 7, 1945, the Kikka took to the skies for the first time, defying the limitations imposed by wartime scarcity. For 30 minutes, the Kikka soared, the NE-20 engines holding steady under strain, showcasing a performance that offered a glimmer of hope in Japan's dire situation. A second flight test was scheduled just 4 days later. This time, engineers fitted the Kikka with rocket-assisted takeoff units, hoping to propel it off the ground faster. But the plan backfired. The rockets lifted the nose just momentarily before the jet lurched forward and crashed down at the end of the runway, failing to reach takeoff speed. The pilot managed a rough landing, narrowly avoiding major damage, but the Kikka prototype was grounded for repairs. Japan had to wait before conducting further flight testing for the Kikka, but time had finally run out. After the war, Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, brought a sudden end to the Nakajima Kikka's development, making its first flight also its last. At that time, the second prototype was nearly complete, and about 23 other Kikka airframes were in various stages of assembly. However, with the Supreme Commander for the Allied powers prohibiting further aircraft production and research in Japan, these models became war orphans. Today, one rare Kikka model resides at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. though its origins are somewhat of a mystery. This airframe, unusual in design, has nacelles too small to accommodate the NE-20 engines and remains largely intact. An odd condition for a load testing model, which typically would show signs of heavy stress and damage. Believed to be among several Kikka airframes shipped to the US after the war for study, this model offers a unique glimpse into Japan's first turbojet and the late war innovation that, had it taken to skies sooner, might have shifted the tide of the war for Japan.